Just decide to make an upgrade. Welcome back to yet again another episode of the Upgrade My Classroom podcast. My name is Kevin McKellar, the host, and this is the show where we teach personal development and proactive mental health strategies for teens so teachers and education professionals can come listen to the show and pick up a few things and go back and literally make an upgrade in their classroom. Teach the students the social and emotional strategies and tactics that they desperately need in today's day and age in order to help them make better decisions. And today I have a really extra special guest today. His name is Matt Bellace, and he is has quite a few titles to his name. This is also Dr. Matt Bellace, and he is a clinical psychologist, number one. But number two, he's also a comedian. And what he does and spends his time today is as a youth speaker. And that's literally, he has melded these two careers into this one mega career, which is something that is so effective and so special in my mind. And that's kind of what we spent the beginning of our conversation really uncovering. We looked at his background in education and how he got his start in comedy and how all of a sudden this kind of over time melded into this perfect trifecta of skill sets to create a really awesome ability to reach teens in a very scientific yet comedic way, which will be so effective when he's actually working with teens. We also spent some time talking about natural highs and how students can leverage some of these things in their world to get a natural high instead of abused substances, whether that's drugs or alcohol. And he, again, talks a lot about some of the science that goes into that and some of the neurochemistry that goes into that. And it's just really, really fascinating. He also touches on some advice for teachers, because it's great that when people like us can come into a school and make kids feel good and teach them some things, there needs to be some type of follow-up. And he does help us out with some, for you folks and listening, to instill some of these practices inside the classroom. Dr. Bellace has a PhD in clinical psychology with a subspecialty in clinical neuropsychology, the study of the brain and behavior. His clinical training included working with patients at the Comprehensive Epilepsy Center at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital, treating learning disorders in a pediatric neuropsychology private practice in suburban Philadelphia, and performing cognitive behavioral therapy at Drexel University's Student Counseling Center. As a stand-up comedian, Matt has performed at clubs and colleges across the country, including Caroline's on Broadway and Gotham Comedy Club in New York City. Matt's professional speaking career began in 1995 following the success of a student group he founded at Bucknell University. Matt's speaking work began in high schools and colleges, but quickly grew to national conferences, professional organizations, and the military. Matt has spoken in 47 states and across Canada, annually appearing in front of over 100,000 people a year. So with all that being said, let's jump into my very special and very funny conversation with Matt Bellace. Thank you so much for being on the show. How are you?
I'm good. Good. How about you, Kevin?
I'm fantastic. I by the way, every time I read your name and I see, PhD, and then I call you Matt, there's like the college professor alarm going off in my head. I'm like, that's wrong. That's wrong. Does anybody else feel like that, or is that just me?
I feel like that. There's a professor, my favorite professor at Bucknell, Dr. Owen Floody, and it was always Professor Floody. And I took every class he offered, and there I was in, my PhD program at Drexel, and I'm going back to visit him, and he's like, please call me Owen. I'm like, I don't think I can do that. My brain is just, you're Professor Floody for the rest of your life. I'm sorry.
Right. I hear you. Well, listen, Matt, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Why don't you take about a minute or two to kind of introduce yourself to the audience here and tell us what you do and how you help students.
So I am a full-time professional speaker. I do mostly youth programs, middle school, high school, college, and also do parent programs and corporate events. But I would say 75% of what I do are large group assemblies like the ones I did yesterday in northern New Jersey, where I talk about mental health and coping with disappointment, and natural highs, which is sort of the positive take on substance abuse prevention.
That's awesome. And you've been doing this, I think you said, since 2006, correct?
I started in 1995 when I
Hmm.
was a student, still a junior at Bucknell University, and it grew into a business. And by the time I finished my PhD in 2005, I was speaking, close to 100 presentations in the year, and it just seemed to me that my life was about to change. Like
Right.
I couldn't do both things well. That much I was sure of. There's no way that you could like maintain an office somewhere. And I was trained to be a neuropsychologist, which is sort of heavy on testing and report writing and assessments of people who have traumatic brain injuries or learning disabilities or anything that can go wrong with the brain. And it's a very intensive career. So to do that and then think that you could just hop on a plane and travel somewhere and do a bunch of schools and then come back, like I don't think I would make anybody happy. So I chose a path, and in '06 I decided, all right, let's just give this a shot. And it's I never looked back except for March of 2020, because I'm the guy who
Uh-huh.
used to brag. I used to brag to my wife, like, for me to lose my business, they have to close every school in the country. March 12th, 2020. Oh my God. Right? Like that was me. My wife's like, "Remember what you said?" Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. Yeah. That was that's bringing that humor into things, which we'll definitely touch on. So let me ask you, when you were doing your PhD in clinical psychology, what was your intention? Was it to own your own practice? Was it to work for, what was your intention with that?
I saw myself as working in a hospital, and a lot of my training was in different departments. I worked in a department of neurology at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital, assessing epilepsy patients.
Oh, wow.
My clinical internship was with traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury patients at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Manhattan. So I was sort of being trained to work in that world where you're either doing like pre-surgical assessments or post-trauma assessments
Hmm.
of patients to just kind of give them an idea of where they were in their recovery. And that kind of work is intense and oftentimes sad, because you can deal with patients who really aren't going to get a whole lot better, and you have to break that news to them and their family. So, in many ways, the speaking work was this shift to, okay, let's talk to young people, which is a bit more hopeful, and perhaps prevent them from making some of the decisions that the patients I had made and ended up, putting them in the hospital.
I I can't relate, but I can relate by uh, a third party. So my wife is she's a well now she's she works for the HEMONC unit at the hospital here in Long Island in Stony Brook, and she's a nurse practitioner, but it's a peds HEMONC unit, so it's it's, as you can imagine, stuff. She started. She was about 10 years or so as a PICU nurse. So it's always is like she was like, yeah, it'll be a little less terrible because there'll be some positivity from this, but it's still it's rough. But I guess that's why we like to try to bring some comedy into the world, which I do want to touch on. Now, I want you to tell us about your TV appearance, because what's crazy is that I watched this clip, and I'll let you tell the audience a little bit about kind of what I'm talking about. But I watched this clip and I'm like, man, why do I feel like I remember seeing Matt like quite some time ago before I even knew him for what he is? Tell us about your TV spot.
I love how you said TV spot, because there haven't been a whole lot of them. But the one show that I was regular on was called World's Dumbest on True TV, and it was a show where they send you a whole bunch of clips of criminals caught in the act, and comedians have to make fun of them. And I thought, oh, this is a great idea for a show, until I actually saw my face with my name making fun of real criminals, and I'm like, who could find me in my house on a Friday at 1:15? But that came about partly because of some stand-up shows I was doing in the city. I used to do quite a bit when I lived there, and there was an executive producer for what was Court TV and it became True TV, who wanted to interview me about possibly doing some kind of a show. It was like a Seinfeldian moment where they're like, so we brought you in here and see what kind of ideas you have for a show. And I'm like, I don't know. I do stand up so I can have meetings like this. I didn't actually
Yeah.
think of ideas. Like, what do you want me to say? I mean, and so he's like, well, we have this show that's starting out, and we think you'd be good for it. And it was on for a number of years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible you saw me on that. It's possible you saw me in a stand-up show if you like going to clubs.
Yeah,
Who
no,
knows?
it was so great. So, because I like I said, I wasn't definitely in the stand up world, but I definitely am like, God, now his face looks, and that was a little while ago. But I'm like that, like his face looks even more familiar, and I'm like, I guarantee I probably saw this guy, but like it wasn't necessarily like my favorite show or anything. I just watched it, but I remember the show, The World's Dumbest Criminals. That's so cool. So this brings us back to the world of comedy. So, and very interesting. Where does comedy fit into this? When did you start doing stand up? How did that enter your world?
Well, I always loved stand-up, and as a kid, I would sneak downstairs to watch Johnny Carson, aging myself, Letterman in the early days. Didn't think I could do it, of
Right.
course, but I remember watching some of the greats. Steve Martin, I think, was the very first stand-up special that I listened to on audio
Yeah.
tape, and it was like listening to a magician. Like, I don't get it. How does someone like say something and then the whole audience cracks up and he says something again? And like, how do you
Yep.
do that? It just didn't think again would ever be me, but I was fascinated by it. And I went to a leadership conference in high school where I saw a whole bunch of speakers who were great, two of which that were really funny. And I thought, oh my gosh, well, geez, I mean, I didn't realize you could be funny and also have a message. So that kind of opened my mind up that, oh, that is a thing. You could
Hmm.
have a career there. But again, didn't think that could be me because I'm like, well, I don't understand. How do you get so good that people hire you enough that this is your job?
Yeah.
It's not like you walk into some place and say, yes, I'd like to be a speaker comedian. Can you sign me up? Like that doesn't happen.
Right.
So like, just escaped me, but it put it in the back of my head, and went off to college and started a student group that became very successful on my campus. In fact, it's turning 30 years old in October.
Well,
So it's been around a long time. It's a prevention group. It offers students late night activities and even a house that we live in now. And so as a result of that group, I got some notoriety in the central Pennsylvania area, and a number of schools reached out to me even before I had email. That's how old I am.
right.
They were like finding my phone number in the directory and
Yeah. Yeah.
calling
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
dorm room and being like, "Would you speak at our high school?" And it was like,
Yeah.
gosh, I'd love to, but I didn't know what I was going to do for an hour because it's not like stand up. But the world of stand up, you start off with like your 5 minutes, and then you can build it. You get
Hmm.
10 as you move
Right.
along, and then you get to maybe feature. You do 30, right? But in speaking, it's like here's 60
Right.
minutes. You're like, oh my gosh, I have
Right.
5, right? And that's when it hit me as I started doing some of these gigs that I really wanted to exercise my sense of humor in those moments, which is hard when you're just kind of feeling it out.
Hmm.
It's I didn't come in with prepared material. You
Hmm.
try things you think are going to be funny, but with a youth audience, it's also very specific types of comedy. It's not the kind of comedy that works in a club
No.
necessarily. So I struggled in that world for a number of years doing the speaking, and then in my PhD program at Drexel, I was like, all right, let me just take a class in comedy writing in my free time. I had so much spare time in the PhD
While
program,
doing a
but
PhD. Sure. Sure.
I took a class in comedy writing, and the end of the class, the graduation was you do a show with your classmates and their friends at some little hole in the wall. And the place literally had a hole in the wall. There was like a curtain behind the stage. And if you look behind the curtain, there was rubble down. They were doing construction on the other side. So that's where I did the first show. And the natural high of getting laughs. And granted, is a juiced crowd, right? They're friends and family. They want you to
Hmm.
succeed, but
Sure.
still, it's like such a high to do your 5 minutes and like get this rush of laughs. And you're thinking, wow, okay, how can I bring this into my speaking work? And I would assess the jokes and say, well, a few of these are good. Like my first joke, don't judge it. It was my first joke. But the first
Please,
joke was,
please.
I grew up in New Jersey. They call it the Garden State because if you live there, you'd be guarding your house and your car and your wallet. Anyway, so like something like that is
I
safe
like.
enough that you could use it, anywhere, but in front of a youth audience, they smell pun and it's like,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, they'll,
Yeah.
turn on you in a second. So it's a slow process. And I knew I had to get into clubs, and I started doing open mics And then I got a sort of a lucky break. I found out that I have a cousin, a third cousin named Joe Matarese, who's a headlining comedian. At the time, he was
Yes.
living in LA. He had a development deal with NBC, and it didn't work out. So he was moving back east, and I didn't know him. I heard about him, but never met him. And so I reached out, and we became close friends. And he said, if you really want to learn stand up, you got to open for me. And it was like all of a sudden, like this door opens up, and you're like, what? Are you kidding me? In this crazy world of stand up, like someone's gonna reach out and be like, yeah, you're gonna just basically do the road when you can. And my life was PhD program during the week, clubs on the weekend, and man, was I getting schooled in a hurry on how to be funny.
That is a wild and how old were you at that time?
I was in my late 20s.
Late 20s. Were you dating anybody?
I was engaged to my wife, who's in my PhD program,
Okay.
and so she provided definitely some stability in that whole world. But it
Okay.
was such a fertile time of creativity. I mean, here I was
Yes.
studying neuropsychology.
Yeah.
Then I'm the psychologist in the green room on the weekend, helping comedians with their problems, writing jokes, like understanding that world. And then when I got an opportunity to speak, I'd go out there and say, all right, let me try this story or this joke. And it was so exciting, so thrilling. If a joke worked in a club and then it worked in front of students, and it was like, oh my God, like
That's it.
that's an evergreen. That one's going to work for
Oh,
the
yeah.
rest of
Oh,
my life.
absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. The teen youth audience is probably the most difficult audience. So if you can do it there, then getting into front of a corporate event or even in a club, it might be a little bit different and somewhat easier. But yeah, very so cool. Such a cool uh, convergence of skills and it's so interesting because one of my questions was going to be with the comedy was that like this strategic was this strategic decision to place into your youth program to make that succeed, but sounds like it was really so organic and it all just started melding together at like one point, which is so cool. Because same with me, I loved, I love listening to stand up, and my wife does too, but not as much as I. So like, there's many times where I'm like, let's just watch some stand up. She's like, "Eh, nah." And I just, yeah, it's such an art. And then when you learn just a little bit about it, your love for it goes through the roof because you're like, whoa, I can kind of watch what they're doing a little bit. The 1-2 punch, one like, or whatever. The turns, unbelievable. So very exciting. Very very cool. So you mentioned natural highs. Let's dig into this little world a little bit. So I'm assuming when we talk about natural highs, we're talking about what you can do and how you can feel uh, the highs, whether it's on in front of an audience telling jokes, or whether it's skiing down a black diamond, whether it's whatever it is, this natural high instead of a substance high. I'm assuming, right? Okay.
Correct.
So talk to us a little bit about that. Where did that come into play? Maybe why did that come into play, and why is that your primary focus when you work with kids?
So I certainly didn't invent the concept of natural highs. I remember being in high school, and the guidance counselor had a poem or whatever, like a poster of natural highs right next to the footprints poem that they
Yeah.
had
Yes.
back then.
Yes.
And so you'd read this list, and it was kind of, it seemed kind of cheesy at the time. It was like, well, you go for a walk and
Yeah.
have some ice cream, and like it just seemed to minimize the intensity of drugs, right? Because that
Mm.
clearly people are using them to get this effect on their brain. And as someone who's studying the brain, I was kind of fascinated on, well, all right, are there natural highs that can elicit certain responses in when you do imaging of the brain, and is there any research on this? And sure enough, I mean, there was the runner's high, that probably the most well researched natural high, and in the years since I started studying it, I mean, all nature of highs have been looked at, from laughing to helping other people to eating.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the brain mediates the pleasure response with different neurochemicals that you can look at and measure and actually compare the amount of neurochemicals released from a natural high compared to a drug high. So I thought, well, no one's really talking about it on this level. I saw a speaker in high school named George Obermeyer who was doing a really great presentation about natural highs, and he touched upon endorphins. But I thought, like, I can go further with this, just given my background in the studying that I'm doing. And I felt like the more specific I could be about natural highs and mental health, the more the audiences responded. So it wasn't just like, hey, drugs are bad, like don't do them because they'll mess up your brain. It was, all right, you want to foster your mental health, you want to improve your mood. Well, here's a great example, and the most pure example of a natural high I've been talking about recently is cold water immersion.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you see these guys dunking themselves in the tubs. If
Wim
you
Hof.
go for a swim in a cold pool or a lake, or you jump into one of those tubs, regardless of your opinion of it, you're going to feel differently when you get out, right? And I've done it. I mean, the mood boost is like 4 or 5 hours straight. You
Oh, yeah.
feel happy, you're elated, you're smiling, you're chatty.
Mhm.
Like, so people might think you just had a few drinks or something, but you're just fired up.
Right.
And that is a natural high. There it is right there. And it doesn't take much to jump in some cold water.
Let me ask you, can you get addicted to natural highs?
Yeah, so my first book, A Better High, had a chapter on unhealthy natural highs, because anything that's pleasurable can be abused. So you can certainly run too much, you can eat too much. I mean, you can use humor to hurt somebody else for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more how you interact with the natural high. I mean, if you take it to an extreme, it can be harmful. Now, the term addicted, to me, I see it in clinical terms. So anything
Sure.
that's uh, got you dependent upon it, or is um, problematic, usually is interfering with your ability to function in your life. And absolutely, I mean, you can gamble and lose all of your money, and that's not a chemical, but it's an intense natural high that can be really unhealthy for people if they take it to an extreme. Same thing with video games, sex. I mean, you name it. Any natural high can be overdone and it can be harmful.
Is that because of the release? Now, I want to say this with the caveat that I don't know what I'm talking about, and I think these neurochemicals are thrown around way too much by people who don't know what they're talking about. But does that have to do with the release of dopamine and serotonin and all that, and how they interact and all that? Is that sometimes we can almost become dependent on those releases, or is that kind of we're going out into the stratosphere there?
Well, the dopamine theory, or the dopamine hypothesis of addiction, states that there are some people who are born with lower levels of dopamine released when they experience something pleasurable. So it predicts that when they, let's say, go to the party and someone offers them a drink or a drug, they're going to use more of it to get the desired effect, because their brain needs more stimulation to really get that feeling. Same could be true for a natural high. You have some people who, it's not enough to say, I'm going to go for a 3 mile run today. It's good. Next thing you know, they're turning around and running 15 miles a day, every single day. They've got to have that level of high, and that's going to certainly interfere with your functioning. And of course, your personality enters into it too. I mean, some people have very intense personalities where they're prone to go to the extreme on things, and as we know, that can also affect your functioning. So to me, it's all about like using the natural highs as part of a balanced lifestyle to enhance your mental health, but not interfere with your functioning, but actually help your functioning in everyday life.
When you are working with students and you are in your programs and you're speaking, what is it? Are you able to give them any type of tactical things that later on in the day or the next week or sometime within in this month that they can actually implement? Because I can think again, just like you mentioned when you saw the poster in your guidance counselor's office that said natural highs next to the footprints and all, and we made an opinion on that. You come in and you bring all the science behind it. Is it the fact that you're giving them tactical strategies to do, hey, do step one, step two, step three, or is it that the more science that you back up, the more they get it and they say, "Huh, all right, maybe I'm not going to drink this weekend." Like, talk to me a little bit about actually getting that message into these students' heads and having them make actual lasting change.
My style as a speaker in front of youth is to integrate the stories, jokes, but mainly the interactive pieces that I do, which gets students on stage, with the science. So, we could do 5 minutes of something funny or engaging that has a point to it, But then right away I'll jump to, here's some slides that back up the science behind why we just did that.
Hmm.
And then I jump back to doing something engaging again, because their minds have been trained to keep sort of changing. Obviously, things like TikTok and Instagram, where you just keep going through images or videos, like they're ready for change at all times. My goal in the programs is, yes, to have them leave with at least a few ideas that they could take action upon, whether it's, different ideas for natural highs or actually techniques I show them. I have a meditation um, part of my presentation where I start with the very simple, where you need no practice to kind of master it, and it's, you take out your left hand, and you could do it now for your audience,
Please.
and we're going to do a breathing where we start at the base of the thumb, and
Okay.
I'll walk you through it. So as we go to the tip of the thumb, you're just going to inhale, and when you get to the tip, you hold it for a 3 count, and then we're going to exhale. So we do all 5 fingers like that. Okay, ready?
All right.
Inhale, hold it, 1, 2, 3, exhale. Index finger, inhale, hold it, 1, 2, 3, exhale. Middle finger, inhale, hold it, 1, 2, 3, exhale. Ring finger, inhale, hold it, 1, 2, 3, exhale. Pinky finger, inhale, hold it, 1, 2, 3, exhale. All right. So as you're sitting here, what do you notice? Any changes? Your breathing, your thoughts?
I mean, I'm definitely a little bit more centered. I have my notes over here of different things, and I'm right here. Breathing is definitely relaxed a little bit. You might even be able to hear it by the tone of my voice. Yeah, huge.
So the breath is followed by the thoughts, which are followed by the emotions, right? So you control the breathing, and the thoughts seem to be coming a little more slowly, more manageable, and the emotions feel calmer. So it all kind of, it comes together. This, that you don't have to actually physically take out your hand to do it, right? You can do it in your mind,
Sure.
anywhere, anytime. You don't have to practice it to be good at it. And it takes 5 breaths, and it works, and I use it constantly. Obviously, when you present it to a large youth audience, you get all range of responses, from
Yeah.
the kids are silent and doing it to their moaning after each
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
exhale, which
Yeah.
is always like, you just gotta laugh sometimes. Like, kids will take things and make them weird for no reason. But I like the idea that, hey, I just gave you something simple. It's effective. You don't need to do it 20 minutes a day every day
Sure.
to master it. And there's some evidence that when you can calm that breathing down, you make better emotional decisions, cortisol levels drop,
Hmm.
you're just a more effective person.
I have to say, I think from my experience, because I was a musician back in the day, and I mean, breathing was every single day, all day long. I was a brass player, so um, I know obviously there is breathing tactics to breathe better and bigger and more efficiently, but there's also breathing in order to become more mentally present and meditatively set. But I gotta say, I think using your actually touching some part, or it's something tactile, I think is tremendous, because when I do like a morning routine, I have a routine for box breathing. So I'll very similar. I'll do 4 in, hold 4, exhale for 4, and hold out for 4. So similar type of um, things. But I think that that tactile thing, I think, is a huge leg up. It was much more efficient for me. I'm going to definitely use that. That was
Well, for
great.
some kids, it's an easy thing to be sitting there, even in class,
Yeah.
doing it, tracing your fingers, and it could be helpful. A buddy of mine was a therapist named John Grund, showed me how to do it, and I recognized right away that it was helpful, but also sort of easily transferred to young people, because they need that kind of quick thing. It's easy to learn. They don't like meditations where they're sitting in silence. They prefer
Hmm.
like a guided meditation. So body scans,
Yep.
obviously this, I walk them through it, but I'm always looking for something that's going to connect with young people, because the concepts that we're talking about, or you could talk to a kindergarten kid about some of these things,
Sure.
right? So why not train them younger and younger? Though my audience is, the youngest is usually like fifth grade, sixth grade,
Mhm.
but they're universal.
So great. I want to ask you a question. When you work with students specifically, let's take if your youngest is around fifth grade, let's take the the middle school versus high school, 6 through 8 versus 9 through 12. What are the biggest differences that you find that you need to change in your presentation in order to be effective?
I used to hate doing middle schools because middle school students are so brutally honest
Uh-huh.
and impulsive that like they'll just shout stuff out. If you're like not totally confident in what you're doing, you get
Oh
like
yeah.
allow for a little pause. They come at you. Like one day, I remember many years ago when I was starting out, my shirt was like buttoned, I guess, a little too high, and I get introduced, and I grab the mic, and this kid in the front row is like, "Look at you! You're all buttoned up," and the whole room just laughs, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this kid just leveled me."
You didn't
So
even
here I
say
am, like
hello
fixing my
yet.
shirt, like I'm trying to unbutton it, like, oh my god, what am I gonna do now? So I realized that at some point my confidence and my timing, it was like literally night and day. Like one
Yeah.
day I'm struggling, I hate this. The next day it clicks and they're in, right? And it's like after that, middle schools became so much easier because I realized, oh, it's a lot about the voices that you use,
Hmm.
the faces that you make, the movement that you make. And so they're laughing partly because of that stuff, and they're giving you the energy, which their brains. I mean, you can see this when you walk into a first grade classroom, and the kids are like, "Whoa, that was great!" And then second grade, they still have that. Third grade, fourth grade, they still have it through middle school. By the time you get to high school,
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
this is gonna suck." They see you come out, which is nice too, because that's kind of like the low bar. Like they assume whatever
Right.
I do is gonna be terrible, so
Right.
I can't fail. It's almost
Right.
like they got a few laughs, and they're like, "That was amazing. I thought I was gonna sleep the whole time, but I like laughed a few times. It was great."
Right. Right.
So I like that too, but they're very different animals.
That's interesting. Now, have you ever had a moment where you're busy, you're a busy guy, you got a big schedule? Have you ever didn't put the right hat on and you kind of forgot, and you say you went into a high school and you went a little too high, fast, and loud for them, and they kind of were like, or is that at this point in your career? I'm sure you've got that all dialed in, but have you ever had that earlier on?
It happens sometimes where you will almost forget yourself. Like I've been in front of middle school audiences that I thought were so good that I would do a joke that I only do for high school and above,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like right away,
Yeah.
but you're like, they even might have said like, ooh, and they're looking around at their teacher like, is that okay? I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get a
Yeah.
comment from the principal about that one.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
With
Yeah.
high school kids, yeah, there'll be stories that I'll launch into because again, it's a good crowd. And I think they're gonna like this. And as soon as I launch into it, I'm like, I shouldn't do the potty bit. These high school seniors don't want to hear about my fifth grade daughter not wanting to go use the automatic flushing toilet. They're not
Right.
gonna
Right.
like
Right.
this bit. So like, but I've done it, and you're just stuck, and you're like,
Yeah.
all right,
You got to
let's
get through
finish
it.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's comes with such a high level of experience. So kudos to you again. I want to start wrapping up with a question. I want to transition to, again, our goal as youth coaches and speakers is to help students in any way we can, but most primarily to live a happy and mentally healthy life. And that comes with a lot of understanding. It comes with a lot of um, strategies. It comes with a lot of frameworks that we have to teach, revolved around whether it's decision making, whether it's around, obviously your work with natural highs and avoiding substance because of all the negative effects and all the positives you can get from natural highs. Let's talk a little bit about the role of the teacher, because I actually used to be a teacher back in the day, in the very beginning of my career, and it's tough to do anything else other than what your curriculum requires of you and your job requires of you. And the good news is, I'm sure you're seeing, is that schools are now much more understanding of the importance of mental health and incorporating it somehow into their school days and buildings or whatever. But what advice can you give a teacher with the little time and mental energy they have, to present some of this material to their class and reinforce? Say you come into a school hey, let's talk about some of the things that Matt talked to us and that five fingers. Like, how can they reinforce some of the things that you're working on?
My most recent book that I wrote is called Life is Disappointing and Other
Yes.
Inspiring Thoughts. And when I think of what teachers have to deal with in the classroom, so much of it is how to manage disappointment, whether it's from the kid who didn't do as well as he wanted, the parents who are not happy with something. Um, and so I can imagine that the toughest part of teaching, once you get through the material, the curriculum, is to manage the emotions outside of that, the test score or the interactions with, classmates in the hallway and something didn't go well, a breakup, all these things. And so the book focused a lot on how do you cope with disappointment? What are some techniques that we can use, many of which I would do in a therapy setting, cognitive behavioral techniques for, say, reframing disappointment. And I think one of the most helpful things to do, because teachers are on the front lines of this, right? Kid comes in devastated, I didn't get the grade I wanted, saying all kinds of negative self-talk. I think teachers are in a great position to really focus heavily on, okay, well, what's this going to inspire? We can't just change your grade. It is what it is. But this feeling right now, which isn't pleasant, you sit with it. It's going to go away. It's going to pass like all emotions do. But then eventually there's like this energy, this surge, and you can use that energy to really focus and improve your performance or maybe change your path altogether, go in a different direction. But I think if teachers could explain this process of disappointment to students and then, yes, parents, it might make their interactions a little easier. It's not like antagonistic as much. Like, I got this bad grade, it's your fault. The teachers may often feel defensive of like, why did you give my son this grade? Well, I didn't give him the grade. And guess what? Even if you feel it's completely unjust and you think I'm a terrible teacher, okay, what can you do with that? Because let's face it, in the real world, you're going to have terrible bosses. You're going to have evaluations that don't go well, and there's nothing you can do about it. So let's, in a safe setting in this school right now, let's deal with that, right? And go from here and use these emotions in a productive way. So I can see teachers benefiting from that concept.
How much do you think it is? So let's see. I'm looking at my books here. The Coaching Habit. Who is that by? That is, I think, Michael Sinclair. I forget who it is, but it's a great book that r- boils down on how to be an effective coach to either anywhere between like 7 and 9 questions. And half of the process is simply asking questions and being able to be more comfortable with asking questions instead of trying to teach what we know, because yes, that's the fastest route to it. But how many times have, even as adults, have we confronted or been in a situation where someone wants to tell us what they know and we're like, whatever. But if we can discover it on our own, all of a sudden it's like, oh, like, do you think that's also something that a teacher can benefit from instead of trying to jump right to the conclusion? Granted, it's the problem is, I'm surmising, is that it is a longer process. When you're coaching a student, you don't have the 30 seconds in between classes. You have to be strategic about what question you're going to ask, when you're going to, but do you think that maybe would be more beneficial to education professionals as well?
I like the use of questions in a situation where, let's say, a teacher is being put on the defensive, which can happen a lot, right, with parents or even a student.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than react with, anger or trying to defend yourself, get curious about it. Someone's coming at you and accusing you of not being a very good teacher. You didn't teach this material or whatever. And then you start asking questions. Okay, well, so tell me. So you think I wasn't very good or wasn't very thorough here? Let's talk about this real quick. What is it that you got from the lesson? Do you think you were missing any, you know, information? Like, it's just an approach to confrontation where you get curious and start asking questions rather than being defensive. And it's way more effective, and it keeps your emotions kind of out of it too, which is really powerful. And it crushes me when I see teachers in that situation. I've had a few opportunities to see it where, you can almost sense that they want to defend themselves and they establish their authority. And it's like, the better way to do it is just to be very calm and to get curious about it. And you'll diffuse, I think, the anger many times and get further with the questions.
That is I think that's really important too, because again, this podcast is not just for teaching teachers how to deliver better mental health strategies for their students, but it's also in part to teach teachers how to be more mentally healthy for themselves. And I think that is a huge part, considering also in the situation we're in right now, education as a whole throughout this country has really got the spotlight put on it in so many different facets. So I think the pressure and for teachers, the ones who want to actually stay in the jobs, I think that's a huge thing. So thank you for sharing that with us. Matt, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I know you're super busy, so I want to be respectful of your time. Tell us a little bit about, you said you mentioned you wrote 2 books. Did you write any others? That's very impressive.
Well, those are the 2 books I've written myself. I've contributed over the years to some National Geographic books called This or That. These are for like younger kids, like 3rd grade, 4th graders. Yeah. And the 2 books I wrote myself, the first one, A Better High, was all about natural highs. Sure. And the second one, Life is Disappointing, was more on coping mechanisms for disappointment. And of course, I wrote it during the pandemic, so it was the perfect backdrop for writing a book on disappointment. There were so many of them. Right. But I will say that I enjoy writing when I get into the groove. I find writing to be, it's a struggle. And I think it has to be a struggle in some ways, because my writing is much better after I've really grappled with something, mainly like the organization or the direction we're going in. But I hope it comes through in the writing, that it's like, it's thoughtful and I spend a lot of time with it. I don't just like write it in a weekend. I mean, I really want to sit down and hammer it out. Even the title of the book, I mean, Life is Disappointing and Other Inspiring Thoughts, was a title that I went back and forth on for more than 2 years probably. Mm-hmm. And I got so much feedback from people who were like, no, that's the title. You can't change that title. Like, that's because, of course, I wrote A Better High, so I'm like, maybe it should be A Better Low. They're like, no. It's got to be Life is Disappointing. Right. Like, that's the kind of rumination that I do over the material. I'm not sure if this is your question necessarily, but I do enjoy writing when I get moved to write.
Well, the reason I wanted to bring up is I wanted to let people know where can they, if they want to pick up a copy, I'm definitely going to pick one up myself. Where can they go get it?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can pick it up on my website, and I'll sign it for you if you buy it through my website. It won't increase the value of the book, but it'll certainly be more meaningful to you.
Love it. And then if they want to learn more about you, is your website the best place to go? Or is there any other places they can?
So mattbellace.com or the socials, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all under Matt Bellace. They can see clips on YouTube, my YouTube channel. You can see me in action on stage in front of students over various years of my career. Well, I didn't look like I had the hair of a second-term president back in my 20s.
It's all good. I would highly encourage you guys to check out his YouTube channel, because I looked at some of the clips and such great stuff, such funny stuff. So, Matt, thank you so much again for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin.
So that's it. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I know I did. I really enjoyed my time chatting with Matt, trying to see exactly how he's able to incorporate comedy and science, and I just think it's tremendous. I think he's able to reach students on an entirely different level, and I really, really look up to the guy. So thank you, Matt, for jumping on and spending some time with me. If you want to learn a little bit more about Matt, head over to mattbellace.com, where you can see everything he's up to, and also his 2 books, his latest being the best title ever, Life is Disappointing and Other Inspiring Thoughts. So head over there and pick one of those up. If you liked today's episode, let me know by hitting the like button, hitting subscribe, and of course, hitting the bell notification to be notified the next time I release a new video. Thanks so much again, and I'll see you next week on the Upgrade My Classroom podcast.